John was a man greatly respected in the region, hard-working, honest, and known for his short temper. "That's my only flaw," he often said. And indeed, his temper often led him into several fights throughout the town. Everything changed when he went to work on the farm of one of the wealthiest landowners in the small town. It was there that he met Elizabeth, the farmer's daughter. The two eventually fell in love, and their affection softened John's rough edges. He was no longer the tough, quarrelsome man of the town. And so began a secret courtship. Sometime later, John decided to ask for Elizabeth's hand in marriage from her father. The old man, a widower, remained silent, listening carefully to everything John had to say. But the farmer was proud and would not accept his daughter marrying a mere employee. He grew furious, expelled John from the farm, and forbade Elizabeth from seeing him again. The two parted ways, but whenever they could, they met in secret. They continued this way for a long time, until one day they had the idea to run away together. John had always saved money since he began working. He had been researching small farms in neighboring towns and eventually found one at a reasonable price. The farm was far from town, but it was all he could afford at the time. It would be enough for him and Elizabeth, a remote place in another town where no one knew them. Elizabeth was deeply in love. She did not hesitate, and shortly afterward, they fled to begin a new life together, away from everyone who knew them. Sometime later, Elizabeth became pregnant. It was an immense joy for both. Everything seemed to be going well. They were already thinking of names for the baby. But Elizabeth experienced complications during her pregnancy, which ultimately led to a miscarriage. The loss devastated them both. Elizabeth sank into a period of deep depression. John took care of everything on the farm until she recovered. He managed the crops and handled all the household chores, supporting her through each difficult day. It was a hard time for John, but he embraced his responsibilities. Gradually, Elizabeth began to improve and slowly returned to help with the household, leaving John primarily with the work in the fields. Little by little, happiness returned to their small farm. The two began to smile again, and over time, the wound in their hearts healed. Some months later, Elizabeth became pregnant once more. This was their second chance. This time, Elizabeth carefully monitored her pregnancy, frequently traveling to the town for medical checkups. Everything was going well, until one day, as John was returning from the fields to have lunch, he began to feel as though he was being watched. He looked around, but could see no one. When he arrived home, Elizabeth waited at the door. Then she noticed a man hidden in the tall grass just behind John. She shouted to him, warning, "John, there's someone there." John turned and saw the wanderer rising and walking toward him. He reached for the knife at his waist and simply waited for the man to approach. Then he asked calmly, "Are you lost, friend?" The wanderer smiled and replied, "I am passing through the region, and I have been without food for several days. Could you spare some water and a bit of food?" John asked Elizabeth to prepare a meal for the wanderer, requesting that he wait on the porch until she brought it to him. While the man ate, he noticed that Elizabeth was pregnant and began to stare at her. Feeling uneasy, Elizabeth retreated inside. John also noticed the unsettling gaze, but said nothing. He simply waited for the man to finish eating. Once the wanderer was done, John spoke firmly. "Friend, you've eaten. Now I must ask that you continue on your way. There is nothing more we can do for you here. May God accompany you." The wanderer responded, "May I at least rest here on the ground for a while? I am very tired." He began to lower himself to the floor. John stood and repeated his request for the man to leave. At that moment, the wanderer's expression shifted. His eyes filled with hatred. Rising, he walked away slowly, muttering, "You will regret this." John's blood boiled at the ingratitude, but when he saw Elizabeth signaling from the window, he restrained himself. He watched the man disappear down the path before returning to the house. That afternoon, John decided not to return to the fields. Elizabeth continued her chores while John rested after lunch. As she stepped outside, she felt a strange sensation. She was being watched. Looking around cautiously, her heart skipped a beat when she saw the Wanderer again, standing at a distance, hidden in the trees. Panicked, she ran inside and shook John awake. Furious, John ran toward the spot Elizabeth had seen the man, but there was no one there. He searched the area thoroughly, but the Wanderer had vanished. Returning home, he asked Elizabeth, "What does this man want? We gave him food and water. Why does he not leave?" Elizabeth, trembling, replied, "I'm scared, John. He kept staring at me the entire time." John was uneasy, but resolved not to return to the fields until he was certain the Wanderer had truly left. He would do anything to protect Elizabeth and the child she carried. That night passed without incident, and the following days were quiet. John and Elizabeth, relieved, returned to their routine, tending the farm together. As weeks passed, Elizabeth's pregnancy advanced, and one day she told John she needed to go to town for a checkup. "I feel the time for the birth is near," she said. John decided to work late in the fields that day to get ahead on the following day's labor. As night fell, a foreboding sense of dread settled over him. He returned home early. Upon arrival, he noticed the house locked tight and saw deep scratches and marks on the door. "Elizabeth," he called, banging on the door. Elizabeth opened it, tears streaming down her face. She clutched him tightly as she explained what had happened. "I was hanging the laundry before dark when I felt it again. The feeling of being watched. I saw the Wanderer crouched in the tall grass. This time his eyes glowed yellow. I ran inside and locked the doors. Then I heard heavy footsteps outside and a growling. Something tried to break down the door. It didn't seem human. I don't know what it was, but it stopped just before you arrived. It must have hidden when it saw you, but I know it's still out there." John had heard stories of people who could turn into beasts. Perhaps the Wanderer was one such man. A werewolf, he thought. John retrieved his old shotgun and watched through the cracks of the window. Darkness concealed everything, but the ominous feeling would not leave him. Exhausted, John and Elizabeth eventually fell asleep on the small sofa. In the dead of night, a violent pounding on the front door awoke them. Something was striking the door with immense force. John leapt up, shotgun ready. "Who's there?" A chilling howl answered him from outside. The creature ran around the house. John could now see it clearly through the window cracks. It was massive, covered in black fur, with teeth the size of a human finger. Its eyes glowed yellow, and its face resembled a wolf, though far too large to be any ordinary wolf. Suddenly the creature reared up on its hind legs. John was certain it was a werewolf. The monstrous figure had returned, seemingly after Elizabeth and the child she carried. John realized the creature had been the Wanderer all along, waiting for the right moment to strike. Even if the monster left that night, it would surely return. John knew he had to confront it, no matter the risk. Elizabeth tried to hold him back, crying. She knew he could be killed by the beast, but John's eyes were filled with bloodlust. Years of suppressed anger, fear, and suffering boiled within him. He checked his gun one last time and stepped outside. "Lock the door as soon as I leave," he told Elizabeth. She obeyed, falling to her knees in terror. Outside, the werewolf waited, seemingly smiling as its yellow eyes fixed on John. Without hesitation, John fired his weapon into the creature. The beast fell, but continued to struggle. John approached, firing again. The large caliber gun was enough to bring it down. John returned to the door, asking Elizabeth to open it. "It's over now," he said, but when she opened it, she asked in fear, "Where's the creature?" John turned, but the werewolf was no longer where it had fallen. It had fled. John could not understand how the infernal creature had risen and escaped. Elizabeth slept peacefully that night, while John stayed awake, deep in thought. If the werewolf had survived the gunfire, nothing could stop it. And if it were still alive, it would come for revenge. The next day, John took Elizabeth to town early, knowing that her labor was near. Once in town, he left her at her medical appointment and stepped outside to think. He bought some ammunition for his gun and a few essential supplies they had been needing. After Elizabeth's checkup, the doctor scheduled the delivery for a few days later, and they returned home. That evening, John sat in front of the entrance to their house. His gun rested across his knees, and a cigarette hung between his lips. The foreboding feeling returned stronger than ever. The full moon illuminated the area around the house. Amid the tall grass, something caught John's attention. A pair of glowing yellow eyes. The werewolf rose from the grass, its gaze fixed on him. Quickly, John retreated inside and locked the door. He knew that his ammunition was too limited to fight the monster effectively. Elizabeth fell to her knees in despair, praying desperately. John remained resolute. The werewolf began to slam against the door with all its might, shaking the house. Elizabeth cried with each thundering impact. John stood firm, shotgun ready in case the door gave way. The creature paused its assaults and began circling the house, searching for a weak spot. A chilling howl broke the night silence, followed by the sound of gunshots. Someone was firing at the creature from outside. Elizabeth rose and peered through the window cracks as John lowered his gun and unlocked the door. Outside, the werewolf lay fallen. This time it would not rise again. Its body began returning to human form. The wanderer appeared, lifeless and naked. Several men on horseback approached the house. Among them was Elizabeth's father. He dismounted and walked toward John, embracing him tightly. Elizabeth, overjoyed, ran to her father and hugged him as well. John explained to Elizabeth that he had called her father during her checkup and told him everything that had been happening. The old man had come to help. After Elizabeth had run away with John, her father had been consumed with grief and regret for forbidding her relationship with John. Now, he knew John was a good man, one who had protected his daughter from a monster. Together, they returned to the grand farm. There was a celebration upon the couple's return. Soon afterward, John and Elizabeth's son was born, bringing joy to everyone, especially Elizabeth's father. For many years after, the story of how John faced the werewolf to save Elizabeth was told repeatedly, along with how her father had arrived just in time to aid him.